Welcome to another episode of Commercial Real Estate Uncovered. I'm Eric Sexton, your host, and I am here with Andrew Love in Dubai. And thank you for taking the time to come sit down with me here in your wonderful office in Dubai.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eric, and thank you, and welcome back to Dubai again.
I appreciate it. You guys have always been a great host. So a couple things that we want to talk about today is obviously Dubai. There's a lot of wonderful stuff going on here. We're going to dive into some casinos because me being from Las Vegas, there's some casino development happening here in the UAE. And then we'll briefly touch on, Saudi Arabia and what's going on there. But we could take up in episodes talking about the two different markets. And the reason I wanted to talk about these is, being from the United States, there's a big misconception with the Middle East, UAE, Saudi Arabia, like what's going on there. So, I just wanted to touch base on you a little bit. So you're a partner here at Knight Frank in Dubai.
Yeah.
You have your RICS designation and you have a master's in real estate finance. Is that correct?
Yeah. So Knight Frank, if you're not familiar with it, perhaps in the US, it's not as widely known, but it is the, I think, largest privately owned real estate company in the world. Still owned by the partners. Our HQ is in London,
Okay.
in Baker Street. We've been in the Middle East here now, I think this is our 15th year. And we have 4 offices across the Middle East, which is Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Saudi, Bahrain, and almost 350 staff, covering a wide range of services.
Do you have more than one office in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, we have a Jeddah office and we have our Riyadh office. Riyadh's slightly bigger, but Jeddah is slowly catching up.
Oh,
Fastly catching.
Riyadh's also a slightly bigger city. I was there I actually met you there in last year in December. It was just that you happened to be there, so we grabbed a quick meeting. But so I wanted to jump into personal life a little bit, real quick. How long have you been in Dubai?
This is my 14th year.
14th year.
Long enough. My son is born here now, so.
So your son was born in Dubai. So how does it having you have one son?
One son, married, probably have another one quite soon. But yeah, this is very much home for me now. I'm originally from the UK, but UAE or Dubai, you could say, is now my home. And we don't, I think both me and my wife we don't have any plans to move back. We very much see the future here. And raising our family. So it's great to try and, promote Dubai as much as possible for those who have never been and never understand it, as you said. Not just in the US, but I think further afield, Dubai or the UAE and even Saudi, there's some misconceptions about it. So it's great to speak to people like yourself and people listening further afield so they can help understand what it is like to live, work here.
That's actually one of the segments I want to get into is misconceptions, but it's funny you mentioned that it's home for you now. That's actually how I discovered Dubai. Is my younger brother met a girl and they moved here like 9 years ago and they're expecting their first child and they have absolutely no plans of moving back. So I keep coming here and I learn more and more about the region and it's really a wonderful place, at least my time.
Yeah.
Here, but just real quick, a couple of the misconceptions. I get asked a lot when I go back to Las Vegas, where I live, which is the party capital of the world. They always ask, is alcohol allowed here? And I'm like, it's totally fine. We'll walk around downtown Dubai on a weekend. And one question I wanted to ask you, because you and I talked about this a while ago, but is it safe? And I wanted to get your outtake on that. And
look, plenty of misconceptions, I guess they think, one, can you drink alcohol? Perhaps there's a misconception that, it's only really wealthy people that live here. Can women drive? All of these sort of silly questions. But I guess from someone outside, how to probably describe it is it's very similar to sort of the States and even Europe. Quality of life, in my opinion, is a lot better. Very safe. I probably actually think it's I've traveled maybe 40, 50 countries now around the world, and it is maybe the safest place I've ever been. To the point where I think when I go abroad, I forget that I'm sometimes in places like the UK and the US where you can't just leave your mobile phone on a table and go to the bathroom and think that it will be still there when you get back, whereas you could quite easily do that. I think there's actually a YouTube video of someone leaving their laptop in a mall and they managed to go and do 3 hours of shopping and their laptop was still there. So thankfully, crime here is very few and far between. I've been here 15 years. In fact, I give you a great example. I lost my wallet last week, and it had a couple of $100 of cash in it, and I got it back within 4 hours.
That's wild. There's a CrossFit gym I go to here. It's called Inner Fight CrossFit.
Yeah.
And one of the guys that I was with, I've made some friends because I go work out there quite a bit when I'm here. And they were telling me that he just leaves his key in his car. He said he hasn't taken the key out of his car in like a year. He's like, at the mall, I just leave it there. Otherwise, I'll lose it. So yeah, just to cover a couple of those things, and we'll jump into doing business in Dubai. But yeah, women can drive. It's very westernized in the essence of, there's beach clubs that serve alcohol. You can drive anywhere. You can own real estate. It's really a big melting pot. I mean, I've met people from, South Africa and Australia and all over Europe and Asia. So, the misconception is it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And I've only learned it through experience of being here. But I wanted to shift here a little bit now that we've kind of covered that. So you've been a broker here for 12 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, probably if not longer now.
Tell me a little bit about when you first started here. I know it was a while ago, but 12 years ago, how long did it take you to kind of learn how things worked here as a broker?
So I actually came as a valuer, like an appraiser originally, right? So I guess it was the back end of the sort of financial crisis. So City it was still very much developed, less so what you see today, of course. But I think that was a good stepping stone for me to get into the career that I'm doing, because, I spent probably the better part of 3 years appraising properties, everything from warehouses to commercial towers and even residential assets. So I guess I got to learn the sort of the lay of the land first through appraising. And then I obviously saw the opportunity that there was really no one doing at that time commercial brokerage, at least not to the way that you would sort of, I guess, the sophistication that you have in markets like the States, the Europe, and the UK. And that's where I guess we took the leap of faith and set up a commercial brokerage arm.
Got it. That's a good transition, going from being an appraiser, because like you said, you get to learn how to underwrite properties. You have to walk properties. You get the different classifications. It's always a segment I always like to ask, and we'll get to it later, is advice for new agents coming up. And that's one of the most frequent pieces of advice, is just get your foot in the door. Take any job in a brokerage. And so it's interesting to hear that you had that same transition. So do you have to get a real estate license in Dubai, or how does it work if somebody moves here and wants to be a real estate agent?
Yeah, good. So the two licenses. The company has to have a real estate brokerage license.
Okay.
And then the agents also then have to do their broker's exam. And that's all administered through what's called the Dubai Land Department, or the DLD for short. They have approved training partners and a program that basically teaches the brokers everything they need to know. And then there's an exam at the end of that. I think it's a 3-day course, and they have to achieve a certain pass rate. And then that's renewed every single year. And yeah, it's as simple as that, really.
Simpler or similar to other markets. Okay. And then they obviously need to paying their license, like you said, at a brokerage. So you guys would hire that agent then. What about doing actually doing transactions in Dubai? Are there any, if I came in and said, hey, I want to buy an investment property, is it very hard for a foreigner to buy an investment property here?
I mean, look, the barriers to entry to ownership are very low, right? As you said, there's freehold for all nationalities. There's very clear and transparent laws around that and the areas which foreigners can own. So if you were looking to come and buy a residential property, it literally, you could do it over the phone, you could do it online. You just have to allocate a power of attorney to someone locally who could then do the transaction on your behalf. So yeah, it's quite simple to buy a residential unit. To buy a commercial unit, obviously, it's just, I wouldn't say the barriers to entry are higher. It's just you need to have a little bit more knowledge, and hence using a broker to advise you on that. Usually the transaction sizes are also a little bit larger.
On the commercial side?
Yeah.
You said certain areas. So can foreigners only own commercial properties in certain zones or parts of the country?
Yeah, good question. So the city, I guess, from a real estate perspective, is best described as the legal term is a non-designated area, and a non-designated area would be only for locals. And by locals, that's GCC countries. So Bahrain, Saudis, Omanis. So they can own in certain areas where a non-GCC national cannot own. So, for example, me being a British passport holder, or you being a US passport holder, you wouldn't be able to own in these areas.
Okay, interesting. They, So I wanted to talk a little bit about Dubai in itself. So Dubai is in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates.
Yeah.
And there's 7 essentially states.
Yeah.
You want to call them?
Yeah, that's probably one of these misconceptions. Everyone thinks Dubai is the country.
Yeah.
Dubai is a city within the United Arab Emirates.
And there's 7 of them, I believe. So there's
Correct.
Okay. And you guys have a big presence. So Abu Dhabi is actually the biggest emirate in this country, surface-wise. I mean, as far as
right.
land size, maybe not population, but you guys.
It's the capital city as well, correct, or the capital state, if you want to call it that. But Abu Dhabi is, and it's around, I think, about 1.5 million people. Dubai is circa 3.5 million people, and then the other emirates are a little smaller. You'd probably say that Ras Al Khaimah is the one that is growing or garnering a lot of attention overseas, as you mentioned at the start of the sort of podcast, which is associated with the casinos.
Yeah, so that's actually, I wanted to ask you about that. So I live in Las Vegas. The Wynn Resorts, Steve Wynn, I don't think he's associated with the property anymore, but it's one of the nicest properties on the Strip. It's unreal how well they maintain it. And the sheikh from Ras Al Khaimah is opening. They want to open a Wynn casino there and resort. How has that affected that part of the country?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I think Ras Al Khaimah, prior to this announcement, out of all the Emirates, had done a really good job, sort of, I guess, attracting investment already. I mean, the tourism down there is brilliant. There's a lot of mountains. You wouldn't think that in this part of the world. Most people sort of have this misconception it's just all sand and dunes, but there is a sort of, some of the UAE mountains, best mountains are on around Ras Al Khaimah. So they've got the world's longest zip line there. So they'd already sort of positioned themselves a bit differently from Abu Dhabi and Dubai. They also have a number of beach resorts. And then I think it was about 1.5 years ago or a couple of years ago now, they made the announcement of the Wynn Resorts opening there. And needless to say, off the back of that, it has been a catalyst for their property market to really sort of boost. And you've seen it in the number of developers buy land down there and the number of project launches in the last 2 years. So it's been fantastic for that economy.
Yeah, it's the Ras Al Khaimah. I actually did that zip line last year. It was crazy, and I didn't realize the mountains they had there. I mean, it was great hiking and mountain biking. And it's, again, I just had this misconception until I got there. I was like, oh, this is actually a really fun place to go hang out. So, I wanted to ask you about are there any trends as far as like specific types of businesses that you guys are working with right now coming into the region, like specifically Dubai, like, I don't know, maybe data centers or certain kind of manufacturing or financial? Just, I'm curious if there's like one trend that's picking.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been really lucky. I think the last sort of 2-3 years globally, I'd say large parts of the world have sort of their economies have been struggling.
Sure.
I think UAE and Saudi as well has, bucked that trend. We've seen probably in some areas doubling of house prices. On the commercial front, huge demand across all sectors. If I was to say what if we drilled into one particular sector, of course, I think data centers has been a big one here. But in many parts of the world too is, I think us as a generation consume more on our mobiles, more on our phones. It translates into more data centers. But suffice to say that this was probably an undersupplied market in terms of data centers. So we have seen the sort of usual suspects of the Microsoft's, Oracle's, Amazon's, Google's, all look to sort of expand their data center presence across the region. So that's one sector that's keeping us busy. Linked to that, I guess, is e-commerce. I think I wouldn't just say the last 2 years, but the last 7 years, we've seen a massive sort of uptake in warehousing space for e-commerce businesses like Amazon. Even the Chinese e-commerce players are now here. And the byproduct of that is just bigger warehousing and more warehousing requirements. So we've seen that trend. And then, probably in other sectors, I think like the office market, it's been a variety of users, everything from legal services through to co-working spaces, through to architecture firms. I wouldn't say there's any specific one occupier that's probably, growing faster than the other.
So there's just a general growth in the area, which I can totally see. I was at Dubai Mall the other day, which is obviously the big one, and they have 1,300 stores in there. It's wild, the growth.
I mean, you can get lost in there. I still get lost, and I've been many a time.
I went into a store. I needed to get a watch serviced, and they said I was at the wrong store because they had two of the same stores in it. They're like, you have to go to the other one. I was like, this is too big. But yeah, it's interesting. So I haven't spent that much time in the industrial areas here. I have driven around some of them. I did want to talk to you about the zones in Dubai, and I'm not well versed in this as far as like tax-free areas. Could you elaborate on those a little bit?
Well, generally as a city, or as a country, until a few years ago, there was no tax, no income tax, no corporation tax, no VAT. That has slowly shifted, as the economy, obviously like any growing country or cities, need to bolster their finances. They've introduced VAT. It's still relatively low here compared to, where I'm from in the UK. It's 20% VAT. Here it's still only 5%. Corporation tax has just been introduced for businesses, and that is coming at 9%. Again, still very low compared to global standards. And then the big smiling point is for me, you, and other people living here or about to move here is there is no income tax. I guess for US passport holders, Uncle Sam will find a way to tax you, even if you live outside the country. But generally speaking, for most people here, there is no income tax to pay on their salaries or bonuses. So then within, I think if you look at it from a business perspective, the country has what's called free zones, as you might say. And there's different free zones, to suit a different variety of users. So, for example, where we're sitting is historically media and internet city, which is catered to more technology firms. So, within a walking distance from this office, we have Metaverse or Facebook's HQ. We have Visa, MasterCard, Oracle within this district. And then you have other free zones which might cater to other users like the DIFC, which is called the Dubai International Finance Center. And there you have more insurance, financial services, and law firms based down there. And then the final sort of big free zone you could probably say is Jebel Ali Free Zone, which is related to the port and the logistics. And that's actually one of the major backbones of the sort of Dubai economy. Over 24% of Dubai's GDP comes from that free zone. And it's a free port zone, meaning that you import and export duty-free. And there's some, obviously, all the big names that you can think of. Some of them we've already mentioned, like Amazon are based there. A lot of manufacturing and a lot of sort of clothing businesses all based within that free zone.
That's exactly what I was going to ask about. So thank you for touching on those. As far as companies occupying space in Dubai, do you find that most rent space or they actually go to buy their own building? I'm sure it depends on the type of company and how big it is. But you guys being a commercial brokerage, do you find that more companies are buying their own buildings or they rent?
I think the lion's share still lease. Okay. Particularly the sort of sector we focus on, which is more sort of corporate and multinationals who hold a more asset-light business model. If a lot of these firms, if they had to go and buy an office in every single city they operated, they would quickly become a real estate business rather than probably their core business. With that said, I think probably in the last 12 months, you've started to see people now look at buying options. Now, why are they doing that? Because the rents in the city have started to rise quite quickly. And so they're trying to protect themselves from that rental growth. Also, eviction notices is not uncommon here, particularly in a rising rental market. You've seen a lot of landlords look to try and serve eviction notices on their tenants to try and, get a rental uplift. So I think that's now, both on the residential and commercial market. People are starting to look at buying to sort of protect against that situation.
That's interesting. That seems to be a trend even in the states where I'm at. I've had some landlords look at some specific reasons. Maybe the tenant isn't using parking properly, and they want to try to evict them to obviously increase rents. Since COVID, like let's say 2020 to now, do you have a range of how much, like let's say office space rents have increased here?
Yeah, I mean obviously it varies district by district and how the class is, but you could probably say, from the bottom of COVID, maybe at least 40% probably, if not higher.
No, it's
and as I said, in some buildings as much as double.
It's wild. It seems to be the trend everywhere. But Dubai, you guys got hit. In COVID, your occupancy rates went down quite a bit in 2020. Is that correct? I'm just going off what I read, that during COVID you had some companies pull out, and then when Dubai opened up before everybody else, they came rushing back. So rates obviously went back. I don't know if that's a fair enough.
No, I mean, it's a difficult one to sort of put a barometer on it, looking back. But I think, look, the country as a whole did exceptionally well out of COVID. And, the byproduct of that is that we've seen a lot of people move here. We probably didn't have initially we obviously had lockdowns, and they were quite strict lockdowns. We required passes to go to the grocery store. But, shortly after that, I think the government realized, look, we've got a handle on this. They were coping very well. The healthcare system was coping very well. So they took a sort of pragmatic approach to it and said, well, look, we'll gradually open up. And once they opened up quite quickly, they still realized the healthcare system could cope quite well. So what we saw of that and the way that the government handled the pandemic is that we just saw a lot of people move here. We've seen a lot of businesses then expand. Now, if we look at particularly the office segment, probably what I would say is that going into the pandemic, I think the market here was already quite tough. So you could probably say that, the pandemic was almost that nail in the coffin. It was like, could this get any worse? So I think it was a tough market going into it. So when we were going into the pandemic, there wasn't really any developers building any offices then. So when we came out the pandemic, there was very little office supply, and that supply got absorbed very quickly as these companies, and still to this day, there is a massive undersupply of offices. Now, what is different from, I would say, Dubai or Abu Dhabi and any part of sort of the UAE in particular, is that, commute times here are very short. I think you could probably now, where we're sitting, get to the other side of the city, even on a, fairly busy traffic, 30 to 40 minutes maximum. And, generally speaking, most people can get to this office from their houses within 15 to 20 minutes. So we haven't probably seen this same culture that you would have in other, major cities, whether it's London, New York, Hong Kong, where commute times can generally sometimes be an hour and a half, and some people even 2 hours, right?
LA.
Yeah, so LA, yeah. So, how do you get someone to go back to going into the office 5 days a week when it takes them an hour and a half, 2 hours when they've got used to working from home? So, I think that's one big factor that you've had that people have moved here. And I think also culturally, I think here, I don't want to say be seen. I think, if you look at our office space, it's very multicultural. People enjoy coming here. It's fitted out in an environment where people enjoy coming to their office. We have breakout spaces. We have pool tables, So I think there's that culture that people want to be here. And given that sort of short commute time, there's not that sort of same, I'm going to, only come into the office 1-2 days a week. And then the byproduct of that is people need a more office space.
That creative office space has been a big trend globally. But it's interesting you mentioned that Dubai, if you've never been here, you just see the big pictures of Burj Khalifa and the downtown and maybe the Palm. And I don't think people realize that the city seems to really be broken up into zones. As you mentioned, you can drive from one end to the other. I drove from one end here. I came from Motor City.
Yeah.
It took me just under 30 minutes to get here. But is there do you see something? We mentioned things like the Palm or Studio City or Motor City. The Palm is obviously I mentioned, but that's one of the most expensive real estate on the planet. Do you see any of these zones growing faster than others, or is it all kind of at the same pace? You see cranes everywhere on the skyline here.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the residential market, certainly, post-COVID, it was like, I think everybody wanted to live by the water. So like the Palm is just gone. I know the lack of the better word, bananas. Like the prices is just, from where it was in COVID today. If you owned a Palm Villa and you've retained it, then, you've become very wealthy in a short space of time.
I was reading about how people were breaking records of buying the home prices just to knock it down and build something bigger because they wanted the actual real estate. So I wanted to shift gears here a little bit and actually talk about your personal brokerage, how you conduct your business. When I wanted to do a podcast with a broker here, your name popped up as one of the bigger brokers here. So I was happy that you were able to carve out some time and do this. Do you have any specific practice that you focus on, whether it's industrial or hospitality, or what's your personal brokerage?
I mean, Lou, my background when I came out of appraising was into logistics, and I probably spent like my first 5-6 years just predominantly doing logistics assets, and that's was leasing, selling vacant properties. And then I think as the market sort of became more sophisticated, my background was originally in sort of commercial investment, so income generating assets. And initially there wasn't many transactions here from when I moved into the brokerage world. It was more sort of one family maybe buying off another family a residential building. But like all markets, they become more sophisticated. There was more commercial buildings, and gradually we saw sort of an investment market. We saw more institutions start to invest here. And we saw more sort of high net worth individuals looking for income generating commercial properties. So slowly, I guess you could say that I've shifted more into investment. So that's really buying and selling of income generating assets. And that could range from anything from hotels, malls, office buildings. And depending on where we are in the current market cycle, I might be busier in one of those sectors. So for the last year, myself and the team have been quite busy with hotels. And I'd probably say more recently, a lot of my focus actually shifted to land. As you said, you've seen a lot of cranes, which there's a lot of developers. And, these developers obviously need land. And so, depending on where we are in the cycle, what the demand is, I guess my focus pivots a little bit. But it generally will stay within that income generating sector or land. And then obviously I have a large team around me, and we have various specialist asset classes. So we have a very large team now of logistics brokers who just focus on warehousing. We also have a retail team who focus on retail leasing, and even data centers. Our global head of data centers relocated from London here just to focus on data centers. And he has a team of 20, 30 across the world, but he personally now sits here because he sees the growth in the region.
Interesting. So you're head of capital markets in MENA, is that correct?
That's correct.
And if you're so obviously that would help with the income producing properties. Do you find buyers that are buying here right now are a lot of locals that you're dealing with, or I guess the question would be people who live outside of Dubai and they're investing here, or people maybe who moved here and are investing here now that they live here?
Good question. So I would say probably till 20 again up until COVID, the market was very local in nature, and I don't mean just local UAE nationals, Emiratis buying. I mean local as in people who were already here, based here. So that might be a British person who's lived here for 15 years. It might be an Indian national who's lived here for 10 years. It might be a business who's already established. They would generally have been the buyer of these income generating properties. Post COVID, you've seen that shift dramatically, and you've now sort of seen institutions sort of for the very first time now look here, set up here, probably to start diversifying away their own portfolios from markets where they're heavily invested. So you could say the likes of Brookfield, one of the, if not the largest real estate developer. If you've seen, they've just, in COVID, completed and handed over a 1 million square foot office tower, or 100,000 square meters if you work in square meters. And that tower has been hugely successful. So they in a 3-year period, post-COVID, have got it 100% occupied, and they've just exited a 51% stake which is been widely publicized. So a great success story, and they're one of now many institutions who are looking at the Middle East to invest. Whereas I would say pre-COVID, it would be quite a rare occurrence for me to be on a phone with an Apollo or an Ares or a Heinz of these worlds, whereas that's now very much changed.
Do you get a lot of Americans investing here?
I'd probably say out of all the nationalities, the least.
Okay.
But I guess to some element, it's a proximity. It's probably one of the furthest markets, that in Australia. But yeah, it's definitely on the radar because, as I said, post-COVID, we've had regular calls with private equity firms out of the States, real estate developers who are now taking a sort of more curious view on the UAE and the Saudi market to potentially look to invest.
Interesting. They, to fly from the U.S. Takes a while. I flew from Orlando. I was at a SIOR, a commercial real estate conference, and it was a 14-hour flight. And I'm flying back to L.A. because from Dubai to LAX is 16 hours. It takes us a while to do that flight. And the time change is usually 12 hours, or now it's 11 with the time change. So I want to get back to the personal question for you. So being a top producer, I always like to ask advice for other agents. Like, are you one of these wake up at 4 a.m. cold plunge guys and go to the gym before you get to the office? Or how do you stay sharp and in physically and mentally fit to be able to keep being one of the top brokers in this area?
Yeah, look, I hate to admit it. I am that sort of person who gets up early. I do cold plunge, which you don't like talking about it because it gets a lot of stick, right?
No, it's fine. I do too.
Honestly, the only reason why I do it, obviously the health element of it, but I get up early is because I generally work quite long hours, and I'm terrible. If I don't do it in the morning, I just won't do it. I'll make any excuse under the sun, like anybody else, to try and get out of a gym session. So I find if I get up early and get it done, then there's not an excuse later in the day. So I think that's probably my first and foremost is I try and get a workout in the morning, and then I'm generally in the office. I'll drop my son at school if the wife isn't doing it, and then I'm generally in the office every day by 8:15, 8:30. And then a typical working day will be through to about, I would say most evenings, just now in the current market, 7, half 7, maybe later, and sometimes the odd half day just at the weekend. I'm not saying that's I would be doing that year in, year out, but where we are in the current market cycle and how busy it is, I think you've got to make hay while the sun shines.
Absolutely. Chase the money while it's
there. And then what do you offer someone looking to get into the profession? I think you said it earlier on, get your foot in the door. I've always been taught that by my father, when I remember in the financial crisis, I was out the job, and I ended up taking a job, in almost a field that I wasn't, was completely new to me, in a very small town in a part of the UK, and I did that for a year. But then that allowed me a stepping stone to sort of come here with a background in appraisals. So I think that's the key for me is always try and find a way to get into a firm. That could be a more junior level entry, and you build your rapport and your network through that, and eventually you'll find a role that you want to do.
That's a great piece of advice coming from somebody else. I've had a couple top producers in different markets on this podcast, and what you said reiterates that as far as the hard work and waking up early and having that routine seems to be a trend. So if you're thinking of getting into this business, get your foot in the door and try to stay healthy and be an early riser. So not only staying physical fit and that kind of thing, how do you stay on top of the market? Because you're head of capital markets, MENA here, and if you're not familiar with that term, MENA stands for Middle East and Northern Africa. Is that correct?
Correct.
So if you're listening, you'll see that literally spelled out MENA, and that means Northern Africa and the Middle East. So you've got multiple governments you're paying attention to, different tax structures, how investments work. How do you stay on top of all that information? Are there any publications you read, or how do you stay on top?
Well, we're quite lucky here as a firm that we have a research department who obviously do a lot of research. So I try and take snippets from that. But I think, look, as a brokerage, I guess you're at the coalface, right? You're out there day in, day out. And I've got a lot of staff around me who are sort of constantly feeding me bits of information. So I think that's probably how I keep on top of it the most, is meeting people. I mean, there is skill to what we do, but ultimately, when you think about it, it's very basic level. What are we doing? We're mediators, we're introducers, right? Of course, you can be a great appraiser, you can waterfall discounted cash flows, there is a complicated side to it, but at the very essence of it, it's putting two parties together.
Yeah.
And I think that's key to it, and that's probably what I've been best at in most of my career, is just networking and meeting people constantly, whether that's existing clients, being on the phone, constantly speaking to people, going for coffees. And from that, you pick up snippets of information, what other deals have done. I might not have been involved in the deal, but they might tell me about a deal that they're doing direct. And from that, you quickly, learn about the rents in certain areas, or the sales prices, the land prices. And it's just trying to retain that information, whether you note that down, or like me, I thankfully seem to have quite a good knack of remembering odd numbers and odd facts. So I retain information relatively well. And then obviously a good team around you who can support you.
So it's great that you guys have such a big research department. I follow your company on LinkedIn, and you guys are always putting out reports or videos in different areas. So I can attest to that. Just being on the other side of the planet, you guys put out a lot of really good information. Talking about your research team, and like I mentioned, I follow you on LinkedIn. Are there any like state-of-the-art technologies that you guys have seen implemented in like AI or something that you've started to use, or you've seen developers maybe use?
I mean, look, from our perspective, our CRM has AI built into it. I know our brokers are using more ChatGPT.
I love that.
To help make their life as simple as possible. Whether that's writing property descriptions, of course, there's always that element. They've got to check it and personalize it. I think there's even on LinkedIn now, there's an AI function to rewrite what you do. I'm not nearly as active on LinkedIn as I'd like to be, and certainly not as active as you. But again, I mean, it's just finding the time. I think we're blessed and being really lucky that we've had 14, 15 years of sort of building networks here. And then I think the byproduct of coming out of this sort of COVID market and it being, in this boom, is that clients have then sort of come to you. So, we've got to be careful we don't become complacent. But, we haven't, me personally, haven't had to use social media and AI as much as perhaps someone new to the industry might. But with that said, it's definitely changing. I gave you an example, even our CRM or the platform that we use, it now creates like our own marketing and sales particulars. You can just click a button, it'll take all that data and make it. Whereas before it was, sometimes getting manually typed. Not that we don't do some of those elements, of course, for sort of bespoke property particulars. We'll still use our designer, we'll still take professional photography, but for certain office listings, it can just be auto-generated now.
That's why the AI is absolutely wild where that's headed. What CRM do you guys use?
We use a CRM called Agents Insight, which is, I think, now been rebranded. I always get this wrong. I think it's Cato or Keiko. But it's actually based out of the UK. I think that's probably one thing that we struggled to find in the UAE was a good commercial CRM. The market here is still very much heavily dominated by residential. I would probably say, like, if you looked at the market, in terms of companies, I would say 98% of the market is residential brokers and residential brokerage firms. So you tend to find that a lot of the CRMs are specifically built for residential. So we had to look outside when selecting a CRM. And then we also have our own internal bespoke CRM, which is a more company-wide CRM, which covers all the sector service lines from valuation to feasibilities, and that's called Hub. And that covers the whole Knight Frank network. So from our offices in Hong Kong, Australia, and London, everyone has access to that.
One of the things you said about networking, there's a term that has been said a couple times is your network is your net worth.
Yeah.
And it's wild. It doesn't matter how good your social media is.
Yeah.
It's a lot of the people you just have a relationship with.
Yeah.
Them. they might go online and find a building, and then they're still going to call you because you have that relationship. Is super, super important, keeping and maintaining those relationships.
Yeah.
How do you guys list properties? I mean, is there any like websites in the UAE that you guys use? Or
Yes. So, I mean, look at, just going back to your point, I mean, I've not had a listing in my name for, I don't know, probably 10 years.
So you're managing agents a lot.
Yeah, no, I would still say heavily, of course, I manage a big team and I have people below me who also manage. I'm still heavily, dominated in transactions. I'd hate that day to come where all I have to do is manage. Ultimately, you become a broker because you like the buzz of a deal.
That's the best.
I can't help myself. I'm sure at some point I need to spend more time managing, but I still love doing transactions. So, going back to that point, your network is so important. And I think this is something I try and drum into the staff is, look, we have access to all the property portals, but don't rely on it, right? Don't rely on that to become your lead source. You should still be out there networking, meeting people, because people want to do business with people they like. And if they have a requirement, they'll call you first, or they'll refer you to someone else who they might know has a requirement. So I always say build that relationship. But yes, of course, like all the big agencies here, we have portals. The two big property portals here are Property Finder. Property Finder, I think it's .ae, and the other one is Beirut. And they're the two significant listing platforms, and all our commercial brokers have listings on those platforms.
You mentioned something a few minutes ago, which is, me being a broker in the United States, most commercial firms only do commercial. But I've noticed here, just by talking to people like yourself, that you have both arms. So you guys do residential and commercial, but it's totally separate, just under the same name. So how does that work? I'm curious why it's set up that way.
Yeah, so we're one of few firms, I would say, in the UAE that have that. Again, partly because just the market is so heavily dominated by residential. You have this melting pot where people have, sort of flowing into the country. The residential model is also commission only, right? It's pretty much 50-50, or in some cases up to 70-30 in the favor of the broker. So I guess, that is in this market where you've got these high sales prices, it's attracted a lot of people from around the world. Commercial is a little bit different. There is firms that just do commission only commercial, but not many. And you could say that most of them are on salary base with a sort of commission or a bonus structure. So I guess when people look at the industry and look at the barriers to entry, they're probably thinking, well, residential is a lot easier to understand. People need a home, they need to live. It doesn't really get too much complicated. And then obviously for companies, it's easier to hire residential brokers because there's not that upfront salary cost. So it's easier to scale. So you've probably seen this sort of mode where you've got, it's evident in the number of residential brokerage firms. So that's why you see so many residential brokerage firms compared to commercial where, I don't want to stand on a pedestal, but it's a little bit more sort of technical with the different asset classes, different measurement standards, different ways to appraise, say like a hotel versus an office building. So I guess the barrier to entry are a little bit harder. I guess the deal cycles are a lot longer. You're not doing a transaction in a couple of days. Usually some of these deals could take 6 months, 12 months, even, I've had transactions sometimes going for a year and a half. So, I think when you're looking at someone flying over and they're 22 years old and they're coming from the UK, it's relatively easy for them to go straight into sort of a residential brokerage position. So that's why you don't see many commercial firms here. I'd probably say, honestly, you could still count on two hands how many commercial brokerages there are, us being one. And then that's why, we're one of few firms who have a residential function and a commercial function.
Yeah, I think that's probably really smart on your guys' end because how many people are moving here and buying houses. You probably feed a lot of business back and forth, I would think. Maybe somebody flies in and buys an off-plan house and then says, "Hey, I need to buy a building or rent a building or something." Does that happen very often?
Yeah, it happens. I mean, I think it's probably more the other way where we get a lot, our residential agents are giving us leads of people they meet, right? How many of them come to actually transacting? Not a huge amount. You like any market, I don't want to say you get tire kickers, but it seems that you get more here, right? People who will maybe say they want to buy something and don't quite have the means, the ability to do it. But with that said, Knight Frank as a business is probably one of the strongest. Certainly in Europe and markets like Australia, it's very strong residential brand. Especially in the UK, I think I've lost count how many we must have at least 100 offices across the UK or 100 branches selling residential. So it is probably one of our core service lines. So through that network, our agents here do get a lot of leads, and particularly within that high end segment, Knight Frank is very sort of well known for that.
So that the brand out of the UK helps get a higher maybe price point, or as far as people buying here. There's some of the villas here they're insane. They're absolutely wild. When you buy real estate here, are there any restrictions on reselling it? I know some countries have this thing where if you're a foreigner and you buy a house, you have to sit on it for a period of time before you can sell it. Is that?
Thankfully, no. Look, some of the developers who are selling off plan will put clauses within their contract that they can only resell if they paid a certain amount, right? So, there's usually payment milestones. Some of them, I think developers now, most of them are putting in clauses that they need to pay up 40, 50% before they resell. And, that is sensible because it stops flipping and speculative nature of the market. But, completed units, no, there's nothing stopping a foreigner coming in, buying a unit and selling it the same day, right?
They it's wild. I mentioned I was at the Dubai Mall, and I wanted to go into one of the Rolex stores, and they actually on the second floor had invite only. There's a sign out front that said you're only allowed to go in this entrance if it's invite only. I was like, this is weird. And Hermes and Cartier had the same thing, so I had to go downstairs because obviously I wasn't invited. The reason I bring that up is Dubai does things that are like over the top. Really some extravagant things here. Is there any project or like office space that you've seen that was just unbelievably innovative or maybe just like luxurious, like something you've seen that you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that they did this in a place of business?
Look, besides the Burj Khalifa, which is the world's tallest building, which if you come to Dubai, you just have to go and see it. You stand under it and you just can't quite comprehend the size of it. So there has been sort of projects like this that have been announced recently. There is some getting built. I think anyone coming here, when you see the developers and what they're building, it's amazing, right? The residential guys in particular, just to the building next to us, there's a big developer called Select Group here. They've just announced the Six Senses, which is a branded residences, and it's going to be the world's tallest residential tower. I've forgotten the exact height of it, but it's big. I think it's over 500, 600 meters, right? There's projects like that are coming out of the ground, and the quality and delivery of these projects are next to none. The amenities that are going into it. I think on that Six Senses in particular, they have 4 floors, over 100,000 square foot of amenities, from cold plungers, which we've already mentioned, to saunas, to squash courts, even paddle tennis, which is a massive growing. So I think when Dubai does things, it does it exceptionally well.
Is it you call it? I'm sorry, would you call it paddle?
Paddle tennis.
So we call it pickleball.
Yeah. Well, that's a different sport. Oh, that's also about.
Oh, you're talking like table tennis, kind of.
Well, paddle tennis is a cross between squash and tennis. So it's like a tennis court with walls or a back glass.
Got it.
Hugely popular in Spain. That's I think one of the origins. And here it's massive. I think there's now, in the last 5 years, it was a business in itself, a real estate business. We saw we were getting at one point a call every week for someone looking to open a paddle tennis. But talking of pickleball, I see that now starting to take off. We're getting calls now from people saying, "Where can I rent some real estate to open a pickleball center?"
It gets quite hot in Las Vegas where I live, and they're opening some inside ones. Like literally, it's just for pickleball. And I kind of have I don't really like pickleball, but for a very vain reason. I used to play basketball at my gym, and they took out one of the basketball courts to put in pickleball courts, and that's the only reason I'm like I have this like distaste for it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to cover too. Obviously, we've talked a lot about brokerage. I'm a broker. You're in that field, and I love it because, like you said, that chasing that deal it's one. I love the business. I love chasing deals and putting things together. But you guys do a lot of like consulting and management here as well. Could you kind of tell me a little bit about like what does that mean when you say you're consulting for somebody? Is that for a company to find a spot or for a developer? Like what is the consulting business?
All of the above. I mean, it could be anyone from government entities, it could be private developers, and it could range. It could be learning more about supply and demand. It could be it's a highest and best use study. And what do we mean by highest and best use? They might have a plot of land in a certain area, and they want to understand what would be the most viable use of that land and give you the best potential returns, and that then feeds back into the supply and demand. So, should we build an office building? Should we build an office and residential building? What is the optimal mix? And then it could even delve into even greater detail. We talk about one beds. How many one beds? What the size of those one beds? And, the team within that department will go and research the market. They'll look at what is sold, what price points that's sold at. They'll do some qualitative research, maybe even speak to the developers or brokers. How well did it sell? Did the two bed sell better than the one bed? The developer might tell us, based on their past experience, well, if I was to relaunch this, maybe I wouldn't build as many 3 beds. And then that would feed into their study that they would then report back to the client on. So it's fairly multifaceted. Obviously, but given where the market is and the growth of the country, both in Saudi and here, there is a lot of these types of studies being done.
So you guys, that's obviously a good thing then, because you guys have property management, brokerage, evaluation, the consulting. I'm assuming they all kind of share information to help do that consulting. That's
the dream, right? Is you call it cradle to grave. So, we have a client, we have a bit of land, we advise them what to do, and we've got some, that's probably. In fact, this year we just completed a sale of I'd use dollars for most of your audience. I think listening in the US is probably around $35 million US. We sold a logistics facility to an institution, but that was a very much an example of what you've just described. We had a client, he had a plot of land. He said, "What do I do with this land?" And we literally handheld him right the way through that whole journey, going back 5-6 years ago, from the feasibility to the appraisal, to assisting him with contractors, through to when it handed over in COVID. We then leased it up using the industrial leasing team, then through to my team, the capital markets team, who then sold the transaction. So yeah, that's the idea, is that we try and keep it within the Knight Frank family as much as possible.
That's always the goal. It's funny. I just closed a deal in Las Vegas where the company, I'm not going to mention the company but the appraiser got some things really wrong, and the brokers representing the other party were in that same firm. They didn't share information, but we corrected it. It's okay. They were good brokers. It was just we're not all perfect. So sometimes it works out. I do want to talk Dubai Vision 2040. Can you? There's a lot of big plans in Dubai. I know we talked about the couple of the different parts of downtown with the Burj Khalifa is the big famous one, but they're building a whole nother airport, like a whole nother part of Dubai. I might be wrong in this, but between Dubai and Abu Dhabi.
Yeah.
Could you kind of tell me what that is, and then maybe summarize what the Dubai Vision 2040 is?
Yeah, I mean, look, in short, the Dubai Vision, and it's very similar. Saudi also have a Vision 2040, but the premise is largely similar, is to diversify away from oil, less so for Dubai, more so for Saudi Arabia, the kingdom. And then the second sort of, I guess, the core component certainly of the Dubai one is to make it His Highness, which is Sheikh Mohammed. His vision is this to be the best city in the world to live. and he believes in settling for nothing less. So, around that whole ethos is how do we create Dubai and also Abu Dhabi? How do we make these places that people want to live, raise their family, and that goes to the built environment. So there's an urban plan that's been implemented, and it's all about creating a city where you're going to have everything there to serve the population. And they're trying to also look at making a 20-minute city. Also, one thing which Dubai plays huge importance is on the quality of life, which is linked to our earlier discussion around health and fitness and sport. So if you look at this plan, it's about creating more green spaces. It's about creating more beaches. It's about also having more cycle paths. And that's very much sort of the vision of that plan.
There's, talking about fitness, there's more gyms here. It's just wild. There's a gym everywhere. And there's one based out of Las Vegas. It founded, I actually did their corporate office space for them twice. It's called True Fusion. And they have one location here in Dubai. And I pulled it up and I went there and it was wild. One of the instructors in Las Vegas, her name's Mienta, and you walk in and it's her picture, like the workout hype things that are there. So I was like, they literally have brought in, places from all over the place for like this health and fitness. When you say 20-minute city, do you mean to have like metro and like being able to drive from anywhere in 20 minutes? Okay.
Exactly that. And I think, there's a sustainability element of that. They're extending, we have metro lines here, almost all above ground. So they're extending the metro lines to make it more accessible to residential communities. As you said, technology is going to play a massive part. They've already started piloting drone taxis. That's crazy. So it would not surprise me in the next, I think, 12 to 18 months if we start seeing passengers commute taxi journeys in a drone. And then, as you said, as you touched upon, we've got the new airport. I think depending on which stats you read, Dubai passenger airport is the busiest in the world, if not one of them. I think up there with sort of London Heathrow. I think LAX is also one of the other big ones in Chicago. But Dubai has Emirates Airline, which is flies to most destinations in the world. So they're looking now to continue that growth platform, and they're now announced, I think, in the last couple of weeks, is the new airport, which is at the other side of the city in an area called Dubai South. And this is going to be built over the next 10 years, and it will be the largest passenger airport in the world. I think the stats is that it's going to cater to up to 217 million annual visitors.
That's crazy. I was reading about this. Just the Dubai Mall gets about 80 million visitors a year.
Yeah,
and that's a mall. But Dubai has done something that I thought is really impressive. It's just not an airport to get here. It's really it's used as a hub for people flying to other parts of the world, connecting, Europe and the U.S. to Asia and parts of Africa. So you get a lot of people just flying through.
And then the airport. I mean, you've traveled through it. I literally have a running joke with my friends. When we're sitting on the plane, we'll take a screenshot of our group WhatsApp chat, and then we'll place a bet on how quickly you can get home. I think the record from sitting on the plane to getting to your house with your baggage off the carousel and onto your taxi is we've done it in under 40 minutes, which, I mean, I don't think of any airport in the world where you can get off your plane and then be sitting on your couch in 40 minutes. And I live, the other side of the city to where the airport is. So it's just so efficient. And that's testimony to the leadership there. And I think this is, these are all the little things I think make Dubai a very attractive place to live, is that it's stuff like the airport, the infrastructure, the roads, the healthcare, the schooling. Whereas I think in other parts of the world, unfortunately, they haven't kept up with the sort of upkeep of these projects and the infrastructure around it.
It's funny. I'll put Las Vegas Airport up against almost anybody. We get so many tourists and conventions in town compared to other airports in the States. They're pretty good at getting your luggage quick. But yeah, Dubai does an incredible job with that. It's unbelievable to, when you land and then the time your luggage comes in an Uber is pretty quick. Do you know if the new airport they're building, you said it's going to be a passenger airport. Do you know if they're going to like divvy divvy up, what if international flights go to one airport, maybe domestic or
Well,
cargo?
I think historically the sort of narrative was that the existing airport, which is in fact there is an airport already there right now, and it's predominantly used for cargo. So the new airport, where it's going to get built, is going to be there. The narrative around it was basically essentially that the current passenger airport would be for either Emirates, their own airline, and the international carriers would move up to where the existing cargo airport. But the announcement 2 weeks ago said that that wouldn't happen, and that they would not separate the operations, i.e. you wouldn't have one airport for international and one airport for domestic or for domestic or local carriers. So the new airport, as far as I understand, is going to be for all airlines, including Emirates, including Fly Dubai. And, if you look at the renders and the design of it, it looks spectacular.
Is it? I appreciate you, sharing that, because, like you said, the announcement just came out, so all the information isn't out. So you're pretty well versed in that. For somebody thinking of moving their company or expanding here to Dubai, is it pretty easy to get a business license here, depending on what it is? So, I wanted to come open a gym was one of the things.
So, I think historically, and this is where we've seen the shift in Dubai and the ability to change pace. When I first moved here, truth be told, it was a little bit harder to set up a company. You couldn't have 100% foreign ownership. You would need what was a local UAE national as your partner for most activities. So meaning that he would be a 51% shareholder in the business. In reality, they usually had a side agreement to say otherwise. But that completely shifted around, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. They brought in 100% foreign ownership of businesses. Now, that doesn't apply to all activities. Of course, more sensitive activities, usually relating to sort of, airlines or perhaps, Ministry of Defense, you would still need, local sponsor. But for most businesses now, whether it's, being a law firm or a marketing media firm, you can get a trade license within 1 day. Trade license simply giving you the license to conduct business in the Emirate. And then usually once you've got your trade license, it allows you to then lease the office space and then also open a bank account, which can be done, in a matter of days. And I think with, certain online banks which have been set up, you can do it in as quick as a day now.
And I'm assuming by getting those kind of licenses, it can help you get some sort of business visa, like getting
correct.
Yeah, like if I came here as an American and I was able to open a business, it wouldn't be an investor visa, but is that's pretty relative easily or done easily as well?
Yeah. So again, good question. Like any sort of, if you're a foreigner in any country, you need generally a visa and a right to stay. So there's 2 ways to get a visa. One is through your company you work for. There's multiple ways to get a visa, but the traditional one is your employer gives you a visa as a part of the package of coming on board. That visa is generally 2 to 3 years. Then another great initiative by the government was what was called the Golden Visa. So you can get up to a 10-year visa, and there's various criteria. It could be skilled employment. It could be you're a scientist. It could be a doctor. You could be in arts and culture. So you wouldn't even necessarily have to be employed. You could apply under these certain criteria and obtain a Golden Visa. The other one is property, and which is also why real estate is being sort of propelled, is through ownership of an apartment or a villa. You now can have a Golden Visa. So give you an example, a family member here who's living overseas could buy a apartment, and the investment isn't much. It's a couple of $100,000, and they could get up a 5-year a visa for that.
Well, you find I've met a lot of people just from being out and about. They have they live here, but they spend a lot of time somewhere else. So they buy like a secondary home, but it ends up turning into a primary home. I've heard that story countless times.
Yeah.
That was actually one of my questions was about the local partner, which you answered. Though I know a lot of countries do that because they want to have locals be involved with these businesses, but this place has grown so much. I think it's like Dubai is like 80-90% expats.
Yeah.
I think. It's wild.
Which I think is really, I don't think there's anywhere else probably in the world like that.
Well, it's one of the questions I get. People say when you come to Dubai, people wearing local dress, and we've talked about how if women have to be covered up in that. I'm like, when I'm in Dubai, you mostly see people from other countries. I mean,
Yeah.
Australia, all over Europe.
Yeah.
I've seen more Americans here. Well, I appreciate we covered Dubai and the UAE pretty good. I briefly want to touch on Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
I know you guys have the 2 offices in Jeddah and Riyadh, and if you're not familiar with Saudi Arabia listening to this, Riyadh is the capital. It's a massive city, and then Jeddah is obviously on the Red Sea, so they have ports and a big city as well. That's probably why you guys are focused on it. The big shipping lane is there as well. Can you kind of give me a summary of some of the changes you've seen in Saudi Arabia? I mean, even from, I think 2018 was the big shift to now, just being in this region for that long?
Yeah, so Saudi, I guess, is always and still is a more sort of conservative country compared to the UAE, which you could say is more liberal. Obviously, both countries are Muslim countries, so they have cultures and norms. And then in 2018, the country started opening up. This is when they announced Vision 2030, which is now also Vision 2040, and it's about diversifying away from oil and trying to open up the economy to other sectors and to grow the workforce, attract new talent to the country. Through international firms and expatriates living there. So I guess the byproduct of that is you've seen what was, you could say, an ultra-conservative country move to be more tolerant of other people's cultures and norms. What have we seen? We've seen, them change the law allowing women to drive. You've seen less restrictions on sort of dress. And just you can see it just day to day walking about, in the malls. Maybe historically there would have been segregation, women only malls, male only malls, and now that is not gone completely, but it's certainly a very different place to what it was just 5 and even 10. I mean, certainly 10 years ago.
It was interesting. When I was there in November and December of last year, I went and popped my head into a motorcycle dealership, and I met. I have to do that everywhere I go. I go get a Ducati shirt from whatever city I'm in. But I met a young lady there who was a riding coach, and she was saying, years ago that was not an option. So it was interesting to see just how quickly that has transitioned. My experience there, I went and walked the King Abdullah Financial District, which was wild how big that was. So you guys are actively doing more business in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can see it in our own business. I would suspect probably by the end of this year, our Saudi business will exceed our UAE business. Saudi is where our HQ is now. It's growing massively. Our workforce there is 70 to 80% local Saudis. That's probably one thing to maybe note is, unlike the UAE, the predominant makeup of the population is Saudi nationals. Put it in perspective, Saudi has a population in excess of 35 million people versus the entire UAE, which is the 7 Emirates, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Ras Al Khaimah, Ajman, Al Quwain, and Al Ain. The total population is only 10 million. So it is massive. It's very vast in terms of sort of the surface areas we touched upon. And so it has huge potentials. If you look at the country, you've got a really busy city like Riyadh, and then you could fly 3-4 hours north, and you have the Red Sea Resort, which is something like the Maldives or Seychelles and Mauritius. You have some of the most beautiful beaches in the world there. So as a country, it has absolutely massive potential. And this sort of all feeds into this vision of 2040, which is set by His Highness Mohammed bin Salman.
The sea there is wild. I was in Jeddah, which was on the sea, and they had this massive promenade where people were driving motorcycles and walking. It was pretty neat because there were people from Western countries walking around, and then there were people dressed in local garments, more conservative dress. So it's interesting to see that mix, and I'd never been there. So to see it versus the perception that I knew, and I don't know why my perception was.
I wish people would just, visit these places more. I think when you speak to them, they sort of have this, as you said, this sort of idea in their head, and maybe it's Western media. At play, both our sets of countries, they they do a lot of press bashing, but I think, I can safely say no matter what country I've been in the Gulf, whether it's Oman, Bahrain, and they all have their unique cultures and their identities, but the people are just so friendly. And that's something that really, is important to get across to people living outside and who never, they picture the Middle East as maybe something that they've just seen on the telly. It's really not like that. The people are really, friendly, hospitable. They will invite you into their homes. Very safe, as we've touched upon. So, the Saudi's no different.
They media. Don't get me started on media. Whenever I travel outside of the country, and they're like, "Oh, we have our set of problems," but they're like, "Oh, it's all unsafe everywhere." And I live in Las Vegas, and where I live is incredibly safe. Like my car's never been broken into. So the media never does anybody, I think, justice all the time. But so we touched on Saudi Arabia a little bit. Yeah, what they're building there is wild. I mean, the Project Neom and the line. I go to the MIPIM conference in Cannes every year, which is a commercial real estate conference. And they pretty much sponsored the whole thing this year. It was wild. Yeah. They had massive booths, and all the sponsorship panels were about it. So it was it's interesting to see their push.
They're literally building new cities, right?
Yeah. Ski resort.
Yeah. So for those who are not familiar and maybe not seen it, it's essentially what we call Giga projects, and they are ultimately new cities within the kingdom. And what they're trying to do is attract existing people within the population to move there, but also people from outside to come and live there. And these range under various districts. Some are, I guess, tourism orientated, which is the Red Sea resorts, and that's very much like the Maldives. You've got the villas on the water, stunning beaches, clear blue seas, fantastic diving. And then you've got, I guess, cities like Neom that are getting built, which are steered more to sort of the technology. Where you've got the line, which is, I don't know where to describe it.
I just Google it. Yeah.
I can't do it justice trying to describe it, but, it's going to be so unique. And then you have the entertainment cities, which is going to be based around the theme parks and the leisure, whether that's golf.
They've hired every big-name soccer player on the planet over there. You can't even get tickets to go to some of the games there. Well, I wasn't successful.
Well, the boxing, I think, was on 2 nights ago, right? Which was the Usyk versus Fury. So this is,
huge news,
right?
We'll wrap up here in a few minutes, but I did want to ask you a couple more real estate questions. Mm-hmm. Whether it's Saudi Arabia or the UAE, have you seen a shift of like where capital's coming in as far as like, you mentioned some companies, but maybe before COVID or 5 years ago, you weren't having like Western companies, maybe like the U.S. wanting to invest, and now you're seeing more maybe from Africa coming here, or just maybe a trend shift of where capital is coming from in the UAE or Saudi?
Honestly, it's all over. It can change from any time and what's going on in the world. A few years ago, you would have had a lot of Chinese money coming into the country. That's continuing again. We've now seen a lot of Europeans invest in the last 2 years post-COVID. There was also the element of, post-Ukraine, during the Ukraine war, you've had a lot of Russian and Ukrainian money coming into the UAE. So, it's very diversified. There's particularly no sort of one country that's particularly investing. I think if you look at the stats, there's always been a trend of, it's Pakistan, India, UK have always been sort of the big investors here, but that is definitely changing. As you said, I'm now speaking to US funds, and I think for Saudi, it's definitely now appearing on people's radar. There is still restrictions on foreign ownership. It's, I guess, not as easy to invest there as a foreigner as it is, say, in the UAE.
Is that changing?
That is 100% changing. They've announced it's changing. You can read the news articles on that. So once that law is implemented, I do think you'll then see more foreign investment into the country. And, with that, there'll be developers, building new office towers, warehouses. So for a market, Saudi's definitely one to keep an eye on. Lots of opportunity there. And certainly for the UAE, the opportunity will continue to be there. And, I guess you could say it's healthy competition between 2 neighboring Gulf countries.
Which is always a good thing. I'm primarily broker in industrial. And whenever I go to a place, I have to go drive industrial markets. I've driven Dubai's pretty good, and in Saudi, and it's interesting. It's all the same thing. Distribution center, then the smaller kind of like auto repair shops. But it's obviously different in when you're in some of these countries because the signs are in different languages and there's people from all over the world.
Well, here the signs are all pretty much in English, right? Yeah, English and Arabic, of course.
In Saudi, not the case. But do you guys do anything in like Northern Africa? I know that kind of encompasses your thing.
Yeah, Africa, we're really big as a business. I think we have over 2,000 staff. We've been there for over 20 years. Obviously, certain places we're a lot bigger. Kenya, we're very big. Nigeria, and of course, South Africa. Egypt, we opened an office a year and a half ago. Thinking of Egypt, you have 100 million people in Cairo alone, extending this. The country is massive, huge potential. So, as Knight Frank sees these opportunities, we will look to continue open offices across Africa and grow our business there. Just going back, maybe give some flavor. You talked about industrial. I mean, for those, I guess we could probably try and compare rents. I mean, logistics rents here, I don't know, what are they in, help me, educate me.
Sure.
What are they in Vegas? Do you work on a per square foot, per annum? Or?
We're per square foot. I've used my calculator here more. The square meters thing. I'm like, what is this? We like to, use our feet month.
Square feet.
But, it kind of varies. Prices have come down.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen renewals in like the southwest part of town. There's obviously the hot spots that were over $1. So they're like $1.10 to $1.
That'll be per month, right?
Per square foot per month so our market does per square foot per month. Some on the East Coast do per square foot per year.
Yeah.
The U.S., everybody has their own definition depending on what market you're in. But in Las Vegas, when you're like near the Las Vegas Strip, near the freeways, distribution space bigger was anywhere from like $1.10 to like $1.35.
Okay.
A square foot per month.
Yeah.
But we've seen some of those soften a little bit just because we've had so much product get built. Really far north Las Vegas, there's a project they've been building for like 20 years. It's called Apex Industrial Park. And I think we have 12 million square feet coming alive and being delivered this year, 2024.
Yeah.
So that obviously there's a lot of supply coming on. And then smaller spaces, kind of like the 1,000 to 5,000 feet, they're still like $1 to $1.50, depending on where they are. How would that compare to Dubai?
Very similar. So we work in Dubai, it's per square foot per annum, and then Abu Dhabi, which is only an hour away, is per square meter. So, but you would say that here, in dollars, I think rents, in the key industrial areas are probably close to, touching $15 per square foot.
That's about the same.
Yeah, so not far off the same. And then in the city, so, this major road that you've described driving up to get you from the mall to this office, I guess is flanked on one side by an industrial estate, which is called Al Quoz. And the rents there have gone through the roof. You'd be talking, arguably as high as $25 per square foot per annum. So that's about as high as they go in the city. It's very old stock. You don't have your class A, but the location's so good. So you still have this sort of gravity. But interestingly, what we've seen there is that as the sort of cities grow, and you've seen this sort of arts and culture district now pop up within there because it's so central. So you've seen people take over these old warehouses and make them art galleries. And that's a trend that we're now seeing in these areas. And then on the office front, from a global standard, I think rents are still pretty low here. By and large, you could probably say the average is about $50 per square foot per annum. So I don't know what that would be per month, but similarly divided by 12.
Yeah.
And then, I guess the highest it goes is Brookfield, who we mentioned. They built this fantastic office tower. It's by probably far the best in the city, if not the best in the region. And rents there set a new peak. They're probably towards $150, maybe as high as that. And that's really probably 20% above the rest of any sort of comparable building.
Where is that building located? In the DIFC?
That's in the DIFC, which is sort of the financial district. It's its own sort of jurisdiction. It even has its own sort of laws. It has its own court system. Very much catered sort of to the international sort of community. So that's by far the highest office rent in the city. So, but even I think if you compared that to, downtown New York or London, it's still cheap, right?
Yeah, I honestly couldn't tell you what space is running for in New York City. I've never, the company I'm with, their headquarters is out there, and I couldn't tell you, but like
Falling out here though, because I think the vacancy rate or the occupancy is falling because of the sort of working from home post COVID, right?
yeah, places like New York and Chicago and in parts of California have had their challenges with high rises because of what you just mentioned. There's a big exodus with some companies. I mean, before we started, I mentioned like Tesla moved to Texas from California. Oracle just left California. Google is moving some departments. So it's like anywhere companies will go to business-friendly climates, whether it's moving from Europe to Dubai. But the U.S. is such a big market. The companies will get up and move, and like that's a big part of my business. I'm licensed in California, and my office is in LA, but I'm primarily in Las Vegas. And a big part of my business has been people moving from California to Las Vegas because our state doesn't have a state income tax, and then for certain manufacturing laws, it's much cheaper to be in Las Vegas. But that's interesting about the prices. They're pretty spot on with Las Vegas, which I find interesting. They what about buying a warehouse? Like what are they prices range for buying a warehouse?
Yeah, so on dollars, you're probably looking as high as just now $100 per square foot. Okay. One intricacy or one, I think what probably separates this market from other markets is that industrial and logistics is mostly held on leasehold land, not freehold here. Meaning that the freehold is held by the government and they grant long land leases and to developers, to manufacturers, whoever's built it. So those land leases tend to be, and this is something that people, we find investors and people coming from outside struggle to wrap their head around, but it's generally 30-year renewable. Okay. So you get a land lease for 30 years, and at the end of the 30 years, you usually have the right to renew it, and you pay an annual sort of what we call a ground rent or a land rent, and you pay that land rent to the local authority that administers that district, which is usually owned by the state, or they own a majority of that district. So land is leasehold. So unlike, say, a market, my home market, the UK, where principal ownership is freehold into perpetuity, meaning you own it forever. That is sort of one nuance or intricacy of the Dubai market and the Abu Dhabi market, is that most of the land for industrial tends to be leasehold. Freehold does exist, but it's few and far between. And I guess maybe the reasons for it, if you asked me, was a lot of the industrial land is around sort of major sort of infrastructure projects, whether that's the port or the airport. So the government have tried to retain, I guess, some flexibility in the ownership, and also as an incentive for people to come and build. So they grant these land leases without any payment of any kind up front, right? So for a business coming in, it's great because they're not having to pay millions of dollars to buy the land. They can literally take a land lease from the government, pay an annual land rent, which is generally in square foot, a couple of dirhams a square foot per annum. Oh. So it's relatively cheap. And then they can crack on and build their facilities. So, that was, originally the reason for it. Whether you start to see, that change and we'll see freehold districts, I'm not sure yet. But, it's around $100 per square foot to on the warehouse space area, the covered area, not the plot size. So it's generally calculated on that.
That's kind of that's how we calculate it in the States too. What kind of construction are these buildings? I know some of the older ones are all metal, but are they doing concrete tilt up here? Like what?
No, it's generally sort of it's a steel portal frame, okay. And then it's just cladded, usually an insulated fire-proof clad.
How do they climate control them here? Are they air conditioned or just big fans, or it depends how nice of a warehouse you want?
Yeah, I mean, look, it of course gets very hot. I mean, similar to Las Vegas, I guess. In the summer, it peaks around, it can get as high as 50 degrees. So, and I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, 132, around 140.
Yeah. So not that hot. It'll hit like 120 maybe. Yeah. But that's I think kind of rare maybe. I mean,
it can hit that, but I think generally sort of the humidity is pretty bad here in the summer.
Only like July, August.
Yeah, July, August. But you know what? I've been in warehouses in that heat, and it's not that bad. And I think that's maybe because they're insulated pretty well. It's usually a sort of double skin insulated clad. So most of the warehouses aren't AC'd. Of course, you do get temperature controlled. But yeah, it's just, air handling units as you would in chillers.
Yeah, big fans. We, in Las Vegas, they just changed this law in Nevada because it's a dry climate. They use swamp coolers, which is essentially just this fan with a wet sponge that pumps out a little bit cooler air. But in a dry climate, so like in Riyadh, that would work great because it's super dry. But in humid places, it's worthless. But they just changed the law to where you have to air condition them now because of if you want to do the climate control, the warehouses have to be air conditioned because of water restrictions, because those swamp coolers use they use water. Well, they're evaporative coolers, is the name. But so in a place like Dubai, it's worthless. Like so only dry climates like parts of Texas, Arizona, New Mexico.
Well, surprisingly on the waterfront, it is quite sustainable here in the sense that a lot of grey water is used, and there's a lot of desalination and plants that go around that. So. Maybe it could work. It's, as you said, in Saudi. Also, solar is one big advantage here. You got a lot of sun. So we have seen a lot of the logistics guys in the last 5 years put rooftop solar panels across most of their larger assets.
Isn't part of the power coming from nuclear power plants in the UAE?
Yeah, so UAE, I forget. Now you're testing my knowledge on this.
Or here, I don't know the percentage. Huh?
There's an area probably about an hour north of Abu Dhabi. I think crucified for getting this wrong. No, it's Bakat nuclear power plant, which I think handed over maybe 2-3 years ago. And that is sort of a part of the sort of goal of the UAE government, is to, in line with many governments across the world, is to use more sustainable environmental forms. I think we have the largest solar farm in the world. I don't know if China's maybe got a bigger one, but I certainly seem to think that the UAE, the Mohammed bin Rashid solar farm is, if not the largest, one of the largest in the world. So their goal is to certainly move to the city being powered by solar and nuclear over the next few years.
It's interesting. So when you drive from LA to Las Vegas, it's on the 15 freeway, and there's a massive solar field. I mean, huge. It doesn't even look real. And that was the largest one for a period of time.
Oh, yeah.
It's right on the California-Nevada border. So I'm curious, when we're done here, I'm going to have to Google this.
You should go and visit it. My colleague just actually, he's at the data center person I mentioned earlier. He's a bit of a geek when it comes to sort of the power side of things, because this data centers consume huge power. It's up to 40, 50 megawatts.
Power and water.
Yeah, he took a visit out there. It's about maybe an hour's drive, 45 minutes drive, and he said it was. I think he was the only visitor. I don't think they get many visitors. I don't know how many people are geeky like him, but he said it was phenomenal and it was eye opening. And so maybe if you have time, go and do it.
I'm going to Google that. Hey, well, that's who you want if you have somebody nerding out on this stuff. It might as well be the data center guy. So just kind of wrapping up here in a few minutes. If you had to give advice to somebody who's thinking of moving to Dubai or moving a company here, what's something that you might have wished that you knew before you moved here? That you could tell somebody who hears this. Just a piece of advice, maybe.
Honestly, I said to my wife at the weekend, we were at Friends right now. I was like, I wished I moved here sooner.
Okay.
Which is, it sounds a bit cheesy, a bit corny, because obviously I live here and biased, but quality of life and what the city has given me and my family is next to none. It's something I would probably have not got in my home country. I've been so lucky, and it's not just wealth building, but it's, as I said, quality of life. It's getting, I can drive from my house to a beach in 5-10 minutes. I don't have to worry about safety. The infrastructure I've mentioned is fantastic. The healthcare, the schools, the whole ecosystem and the environment. It's just a fantastic place to live. Of course, there is challenges and there's downfalls. Obviously, one downfall is being away from your family. As you know, your family actually lives here, and you live in the States, so you've got the opposite problem. But with any new city, it's evolving, it's changing. But the leadership, the government, very agile, very pro-business. So they're always thinking of their citizens and trying to think of ways to improve. And, you're seeing this shift now, there's sort of, I don't want to say a re-world order, but it does seem like that. The Middle East is now very much on the map. It's now a key global player. And I think that's going to continue. So, for anyone listening who's thinking of a change, certainly look at Dubai, certainly look at Abu Dhabi, look at Saudi. Is a country going to be, both countries are going to be a force to be reckoned with over the next 5-10 years.
Well, it's interesting. One of the perceptions that I didn't realize was it's obviously it's a Muslim country and there's mosques everywhere, but there's Catholic cathedrals here. There's Christian churches. Like it's just I didn't know that until I got here. It was just
extremely tolerant. I mean, I think I probably should know this stat. One stat I don't know is how many different nationalities I have working in my own office, but I would probably guess at least 30, 40, right? And as you said, it's a melting pot. And that's for me, bringing up a child and raising someone. I walked into his nursery this morning and, there was a Chinese, there was Russian, there was British, there was French, his teacher's from Colombia. And I'm like, whoa, great place to raise a child, right? What better is that, there is no racism, everyone's brought up, everyone respects each other's culture, everyone has a joke, and you really learn about, other nations. And I think that's probably, if you could take away one thing that, why do countries not get along is perhaps they don't understand one another and their cultures and norms. And certainly working in this office and working with people in my team, you understand that. And, you can perhaps understand why countries fall out. But once you get to know them and, understand how they work and how they think, it bodes very well.
Yeah, I keep mentioning the gym. That's an easy place to go meet people. And there's literally people from all over the world that, South Africa, France, and a couple, there's a guy from the Philippines that I've gotten to know pretty well. So it's true.
I think anyone going into politics should just come and live here for a few years, right?
That's one thing you don't notice here is like we're in an election season and we take our politics very seriously.
Yeah.
And you don't notice there's no mailers here, radio ads or something. Yeah. So I'm headed back to that. But yeah, the U.S. I love living there. We have a very diverse place. Yeah. I mean, even state to state varies. I mean, California, you drive from San Francisco to L.A. and Santa Barbara. These places are totally different places. But that's a little off topic. So, so your son obviously likes going to the school he goes to. So for a kid, it's great. So wrapping up here, I just wanted to ask you any other things you wanted to touch on, or maybe something people else know about Dubai?
I think you've covered it. I mean, we've covered a diverse a lot of topics, but certainly, Luke, even if you're not moving here, as you said, airport is a transient airport. If you're ever passing through, if someone's coming from America to Thailand on a holiday, stop by 2-3 days, and come and experience the culture for yourself.
Yeah, they I tell people to do that. Yeah, they'd fly through Dubai going to some of the Maldives or something. I say to have a 2 or 3 day layover.
Yeah.
That's a great way to experience the things you do. But so one last thing, it's kind of interesting. You and I were talking about this. The brokerage is a little different here. Like in the U.S., commercial brokers are commission only.
Yeah.
And here you guys have a little bit different of a structure where you get like a salary and a bonus structure. Is that a UK model or?
Yeah, I mean, UK is very sort of heavenly salary model. I think I can't, even on the residential side. So it's all salaried. And I think there's pros to that. You could perhaps argue, and I'm not saying this is true for everyone, but if you're on commission, sometimes you're always looking at where your next fee is coming from.
Sure.
Perhaps in tougher times, you're maybe focusing on deals that you shouldn't focus on. You focus on the ones that are quicker to get across the line. Whereas if you're salaried, you can maybe take a longer term view and work on deals that, might take longer, but are probably ones that you should be working on. Maybe client advice, you could argue that if you're commission only, are you really giving your client the right advice? Ultimately, if your fee is purely linked to price, then are you driving up price? It's a tough ethical question.
You see a lot of brokers in the U.S., they get filtered out because they're new to the business. They do 1, maybe 2 deals, and they get filtered through they maybe do something that's a little unethical or they don't know what they're doing. So longevity, always be upfront with your brokers.
The pros, I guess, is that you you're out there, you're hungry, and it really motivates people, right? And I guess you can earn a lot of money on the commission only. So I think there's pros and cons. I think here, the commercial brokerages that are active, I think, is very similar to our model. So it's a sort of best of both worlds in some ways. We try and incentivize them with a good salary, especially if you're moving to Dubai. And as I said, commercial, the deal cycles are longer versus residential. So if someone's moving here and they don't know the market and we're putting them on commercial only and it takes them 4 months to do a deal, it's not going to work. So that's one of the reasons also why we follow that model is that we recognize that when they move to the country, things aren't cheap. Schooling and the healthcare. We do give obviously medical insurance to all employees, but we give them that salary, allows them to find their feet, learn the market, and then obviously they've got a target and they earn bonuses when those targets are hit.
Well, it doesn't matter what system you're on, commission only or the salary based. If you don't do right by your client and build those relationships, you're not going to last in the business one way or another. It's funny, like when I started, I was in college and I was a broker's assistant and I was running around doing little deals, but I'm still working with some of those clients, and this is almost 20 years later. I did want to say one thing is very cool. When I originally reached out to you to do this podcast, I was like, hey, can we rent a podcast studio? I found one that was pretty close, and you're like, how about we just do one in my office? So you were kind enough. You actually have if you're listening to this audio, Andrew was kind enough to build a whole podcast studio in his office for us to do this, which was cool. So you obviously value your time, where you're like, I'm going to just walk. Yeah,
I didn't want to sound too arrogant, or as I said at the start, the market is a bit crazy here at the moment, and you know how it is when you're in a transactional world environment. We have a number of deals, so you were very kind enough to come to the office. We have if anyone else is working in real estate and passing through, by all means, reach out, come and see our office. We have stunning views over the Palm Jumeirah, which is this man-made island in the shape of a palm, and also of downtown where you can see the Burj Khalifa. So you thankfully pop past, and we've got one of these booths in the podcast set up.
You guys have a wonderful office. Really quite the views. I wanted to say thank you, Andrew, for setting this up. How can people get a hold of you? What's the best way to get in contact with you?
I'm not on Instagram or on that sort of platform, although some of my younger staff are. LinkedIn, they can reach out. Whilst I might not post as much as I want, or certainly not as much as you guys, I do check my inbox on there. And of course, the email. If you Google my name, it'll come up, and on the company website. But it's andrew.love@ME, which stands for Middle East, knightfrank.com.
So you can just Google your names, and it'll take you right to the website. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time, and I look forward to doing this again sometime.
Thank you, Eric.